I had always believed I understood my marriage with Sarah. We'd been together for 12 years, long enough to recognize each other's moods, long enough to feel comfortable without trying too hard, long enough to assume we'd navigate life together smoothly. At least, that's what I thought. It was a Friday evening, and her company was holding its annual party. Sarah had been excited about it all week, eager to see colleagues she rarely got to meet. I didn't mind going, mostly because she insisted. I had my own simple approach: smile, engage politely, and keep my drink topped up. Yet as I got ready, a nagging feeling of unease settled in. Sarah had seemed different lately, not distant, exactly, but quieter in a way that tightened my chest. When we arrived, the room buzzed with conversation and the clink of glasses. Sarah immediately gravitated toward her co-workers, leaving me lingering by the bar. She turned back, offering a polite, controlled smile, and said, "Just pretend we're friends tonight." Her words hit harder than I expected. After 12 years, she wanted me to be a stranger by her side, at least in front of her colleagues. It wasn't cruel, just a way to keep a boundary. But in that moment, I felt a sharp clarity. The warmth, the closeness, the little signs that had once bound us together, they were slipping away. I nodded and replied, "All right, friends it is." Then I noticed her boss, Miss Harper. Tall, poised, slightly aloof, the kind of person who could command a room without raising her voice. Sarah had mentioned her often. Professional, precise, always polite, and impossible to impress. I had met her briefly before and remembered that same air of self-assurance. On impulse, I moved closer. If I had to endure Sarah's subtle indifference, at least I could be near someone who actually seemed to notice me. When I introduced myself, Miss Harper's smile was small but genuine. "You must be Sarah's husband," she said, with a tone that was curious rather than judgmental. We began chatting about work, the city, and trivial topics that didn't matter, but her attention was steady and undistracted. She didn't check her phone constantly or scan the room. She listened. I realized I hadn't felt that kind of patient attention in years. Sarah drifted in and out of the conversation, giving brief smiles but never fully engaging. Each time she did, a small flicker of disappointment sparked inside me. I tried to focus on Miss Harper's easy conversation, her warm laugh, but I couldn't ignore the contrast. At one point, Sarah leaned in and whispered, "Are you enjoying yourself?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine," I said. That single word carried a weight I couldn't dismiss. Fine wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough for a long time. Not for me, not for her, not for the connection we once had. The night wore on. Drinks flowed, laughter rang out, and I played along politely, but beside me, Miss Harper remained attentive. She asked questions I wanted to answer and actually listened to my responses. Being in that conversation felt almost like seeing myself reflected in a mirror. The confident, valued, appreciated version of me I hadn't encountered in years. Meanwhile, Sarah didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't care. The warmth we used to share had become distant, transactional, a polite facade. I realized I hadn't truly been seen at home, in conversation, or in the small moments that keep a marriage alive. By the end of the evening, a strange clarity had settled over me. Sitting with someone who genuinely paid attention made me confront a truth I had been avoiding. I wasn't invisible because I had changed. I was invisible because she had stopped seeing me. And if that was our reality, pretending everything was fine no longer made sense. As the party wound down, I felt an unexpected lightness. I hadn't spent a single moment worrying about Sarah's reactions or rehearsing smiles. I simply existed in the conversation, and it felt liberating. Miss Harper stepped away briefly, and in her absence, I sensed a small weight lift from my shoulders. When she returned with a drink, she casually asked, "So, how long have you been in construction?" I laughed, told her about my first job after college, and she listened with genuine interest. The conversation flowed effortlessly, natural, reciprocal, without awkward pauses or cold detachment. I could finally relax, something I hadn't felt with Sarah in years. Then Sarah approached, smiling once again, but by that point, I had already glimpsed a truth I could no longer ignore. But tonight felt different. A bit tense, a touch hesitant. "I see you two are getting along," she said, her tone light, yet carrying something unspoken beneath the surface. I looked at her, nodded, and said nothing more. The truth was, I didn't feel guilty. Sitting next to Miss Harper, being genuinely heard and respected, reminded me what it felt like to matter to someone. For the first time in months, or maybe years, I realized I could exist without constantly chasing Sarah's approval. The drive home was quiet. Sarah chatted about the night's events, her voice cheerful in that casual, familiar way, but it no longer included me in the same way. I gave short answers, and she noticed. I could see it in the rearview mirror, the way her eyes searched mine, seeking something, connection, reassurance, recognition, but finding none. That night, lying in the bed we had shared for over a decade, the room felt strangely alien. Sarah had already curled up with her phone, scrolling quietly on her side. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the conversation at the party, the laughter that had felt real, and the simple sensation of being noticed. There were no grand romantic gestures, no dramatic confessions. Just clarity. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes within myself. I began recognizing the compromises I had made, the small sacrifices I had taken for granted. I realized I had spent so much energy trying to keep the peace and be the perfect husband that I had lost sight of my own needs. It was a difficult awakening, but a necessary one. One evening, Sarah invited me to a casual dinner with a few co-workers. The same pattern emerged. She spoke, others listened, and I smiled politely. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer sought her approval desperately. I could exist in the space between us without fear, tension, or that hollow ache I had grown so used to. And for some reason, this newfound confidence did not go unnoticed. A week later, I ran into Miss Harper at a cafe. She recognized me immediately, greeted me warmly, and we shared a brief conversation about work, life, and the city. There was no pressure, no hidden expectation, just attention, presence, and genuine interest. It was astonishing how a simple interaction could restore a sense of self-worth I had almost forgotten. This didn't mean I had given up on Sarah. I still cared for her and hoped we could reconnect. But I had learned something essential. Connection cannot be forced. If someone chooses to overlook you, no amount of silence or accommodation will change that. Recognition must be mutual, respect reciprocal, and love cannot survive without attention. That night, lying in bed again, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not naive happiness, not relief from avoidance, but a quiet certainty that I had reclaimed a piece of myself. I didn't need validation or approval. I simply needed to be seen. And if Sarah could not offer that, I knew I could still exist fully in my own presence. In the end, the company party was more than just awkward conversations and forced smiles. It was a mirror showing me what had been missing. Sometimes, the smallest moments, the briefest glances of authentic attention, are enough to remind you of your worth. Sitting beside someone who truly noticed me, even for a short while, shifted my perspective entirely. As for Sarah, our marriage continued, but with a subtle change. I no longer tried to force closeness where it had faded. I no longer allowed invisibility to diminish me. I had learned that being fully present in myself could be just as powerful as any shared laughter or long-held touch. And for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely, undeniably seen.